The rain was coming down in sheets that October night when my parents said the words that would haunt me forever. "You're a burden, Emma. We can't do this anymore." I sat in the back seat of their Honda, my legs completely numb from the waist down, a side effect of the medication I'd been taking for the past 3 years. The streetlights blurred through the water streaming down the windows, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs as we drove further and further from home. "Mom, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the windshield wipers. "I just need help with the medical bills. Dr. Martinez said the new treatment might—" "Enough!" My father's voice cut through the air like a knife. 28 years, Emma. 28 years of hospitals, specialists, medications we can't afford. Your mother and I are done. When the car finally stopped, I realised we weren't at a hospital or even a friend's house. We were on Maple Street, 3 miles from home, in front of an abandoned convenience store. The neon sign flickered weakly in the darkness, casting eerie shadows across the empty parking lot. My mother turned around in her seat, and for a moment I thought I saw something that might have been regret in her eyes, but then her expression hardened. "Get out." "I can't walk," I said, my voice breaking. "Mum, you know I can't walk right now. The steroids make my legs—" "That's not our problem anymore." My father was already getting out of the car, coming around to open my door. The rain immediately soaked through his shirt, but he didn't seem to care. I couldn't move, literally couldn't move. The combination of medications I was on, prednisone, methotrexate, and 3 others whose names I could barely pronounce, had left my nervous system in chaos. Some days I could walk with a cane. Other days, like today, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else entirely. "Please don't do this," I begged, as my father reached for me. "I'll figure something else out. I won't ask for money anymore, I promise." But he was already pulling me from the car, his movements mechanical, like he was handling cargo instead of his daughter. When he set me down on the wet pavement, my legs immediately buckled. I collapsed against the brick wall of the store, the rough surface scraping against my back through my thin sweater. "Your phone," my mother said through the cracked window. "What?" "Give me your phone. We pay for that plan." With shaking hands, I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and handed it over. The last connection I had to the outside world gone, just like that. I watched their taillights disappear into the darkness, and for the first time in my adult life, I was truly alone. The rain was relentless, soaking through my clothes within minutes. I tried to drag myself toward the overhang of the store, but my arms weren't strong enough to pull my dead weight across the parking lot. This wasn't supposed to be my life. I thought back to when I was 7 years old, lying in a hospital bed at Children's Memorial. I had been diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, but the doctors said it was manageable. What they didn't tell us was that manageable meant a lifetime of medications, treatments, and uncertainty. I remembered my 8th birthday, the one where my parents forgot to visit me in the hospital, because Sarah, my older sister, had a soccer game. Marcus had snuck in that evening with a cupcake from the hospital cafeteria and a single candle he'd stolen from the nurse's station. "Make a wish, Em," he'd whispered, glancing toward the door to make sure no nurses were coming. I'd wished to go home, but even then, at 8 years old, I think I knew that home wasn't really home for me anymore. Marcus was different, though. He was 6 years older, already in high school when I got sick. While our parents grew increasingly frustrated with doctor appointments and insurance claims, Marcus learned everything he could about my condition. He drove me to physical therapy when Mum said she was too tired. He researched new treatments online when Dad said we'd tried everything. But Marcus couldn't be there all the time. He had his own life, college, law school, his career, and our parents made it clear that his job wasn't to take care of his sick little sister. The night of Sarah's engagement party, I'd called Mom to ask if someone could pick me up. I'd been having a particularly bad flare, and the thought of taking 3 buses to get there seemed impossible. "Emma, honey," Mum had said in that tone she'd perfected over the years, the one that sounded caring but felt like ice. "You know these events are hard for you, all that standing, all those people. Maybe it's better if you rest at home." I'd hung up the phone and cried for 2 hours. Marcus called me later that night. "I saw you weren't at the party." "I wasn't feeling well," I'd lied. "Em," his voice was gentle but firm, "they didn't invite you, did they?" The silence stretched between us until he had his answer. "I'm coming over," he'd said, but I'd already hung up. I couldn't handle his pity on top of everything else. Now, sitting in the rain outside this abandoned store, I realized that Marcus's concern hadn't been pity at all. It had been love, the only real love I'd received from my family in years. My teeth were chattering uncontrollably now, and I could feel my body temperature dropping. Hypothermia was a real possibility. I tried to call for help, but my voice was too weak to carry over the sound of the rain. The street was completely empty. No cars, no pedestrians, nothing. This is how I'm going to die, I thought. Alone, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But then I heard footsteps, slow, cautious footsteps splashing through the puddles in the parking lot. I looked up, expecting to see a stranger, maybe someone who would call 911, maybe someone who would just keep walking. Instead, I saw a familiar silhouette approaching through the rain. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the navy blue raincoat I'd given him for Christmas 3 years ago. Marcus. He didn't run to me. He walked slowly, deliberately, like he was trying not to scare me. When he got close enough for me to see his face clearly, I noticed his eyes were red-rimmed and filled with an anger I'd never seen before. "It's okay," he said, kneeling down beside me in the rain. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a certainty that made my chest tighten with emotion. "I never forgot you, Em, not for a single day." I wanted to ask him how he knew where to find me, how he'd gotten here so quickly, but I couldn't form the words. Relief, shock, and overwhelming gratitude crashed over me in waves. He shrugged off his raincoat and wrapped it around my shoulders, then scooped me up like I weighed nothing. I buried my face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with rain. "How did you—" I started to ask. "Later," he said firmly. "Right now, we need to get you warm and dry." As he carried me toward his car, a sleek black sedan I'd never seen before, I caught a glimpse of something in his expression that I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't just concern or brotherly love, it was something deeper, more determined. It was the look of someone who'd been planning for this moment for a very long time. The apartment Marcus brought me to wasn't his old place downtown. This was somewhere new, a spacious 2-bedroom with tall windows and hardwood floors. Everything was perfectly arranged, from the medical supplies in the bathroom to the specialized ergonomic furniture in the living room. "Marcus," I said as he helped me settle onto the couch, "whose apartment is this?" He handed me a warm towel and sat down across from me, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. For a moment, he looked exactly like the teenage boy who used to sneak me extra pudding cups from the hospital cafeteria. "It's yours, Em," I stared at him. "What do you mean it's mine?" "I mean, I've been paying rent on this place for 2 years, waiting for the day when you'd need it." He ran a hand through his wet hair, and I noticed how much older he looked than the last time I'd seen him. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and his jaw carried a tension that spoke of sleepless nights. 2 years? I couldn't wrap my head around what he was telling me. "You've been planning this for 2 years?" Marcus stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the rain that was still coming down hard. "I've been watching them, Emma, watching how they treat you, documenting it." Something cold settled in my stomach. Documenting it. He turned back to me, and I saw that determined expression again, stronger now, more focused. "I'm a lawyer now, Em, have been for 3 years. Corporate litigation mostly, but I've been studying family law on the side." "Why?" "Because what they've been doing to you isn't just cruel. It's illegal." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I felt like I was seeing my brother clearly for the first time in years, not just the caring older sibling who brought me birthday cupcakes, but a man who'd built his entire career around the tools he'd need to fight for me. "Marcus, what are you saying?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a folder labelled Evidence, EC Case. My initials. There were dozens of files inside. Photos, audio recordings, medical records, financial documents. "Elder abuse," he said quietly, "financial exploitation, medical neglect, abandonment of a dependent adult." He looked up at me with eyes that were both gentle and fierce. "They left you on the side of the road in the rain, Emma. You couldn't walk, couldn't call for help, and they drove away. That's not just heartless, it's criminal." I felt the world tilt slightly beneath me. "You were following them tonight." "I've been following them for weeks, ever since you called me last month crying about the medical bills they refused to help with." His voice was steady, professional, but I could hear the underlying fury. "I installed a GPS tracker on their car. I've been recording their phone conversations about you. I have witnesses who've seen how they treat you at family gatherings." "Witnesses?" "Sarah's husband, Mike, 3 of our cousins, Mrs. Henderson from next door, who used to watch you when you were little." Marcus sat back down, leaning forward intently. "They all saw it, Em. They all knew what was happening, but nobody said anything because they figured it was family business." I thought about all those family dinners where I'd been seated at the kids' table even as an adult. All those conversations that stopped when I entered the room. All those times I'd been told I was too sensitive when I pointed out how differently I was treated. "What are you planning to do?" Marcus reached over and took my hand, the first gentle touch I'd received from a family member in months. "I'm going to make them pay for every single thing they've done to you. And then I'm going to make sure they never have the opportunity to hurt you again." The rain continued to pound against the windows, but for the first time in years I felt safe, protected. Like someone was finally on my side. I had no idea that Marcus's plan was bigger than just legal action. I had no idea that he'd been building a case that would expose not just our parents, but the entire system of willful blindness that had allowed my abuse to continue for decades. I had no idea that by tomorrow everything would change forever. Everything. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in the witness box of the Cook County Circuit Court, my hands trembling as I stared out at the packed courtroom. Marcus had warned me there would be media attention. Abandonment cases involving disabled adults had become a hot-button issue in Illinois. But I hadn't expected this circus. My parents sat at the defendant's table with their attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit who kept whispering urgently in my mother's ear. Dad stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight, refusing to look in my direction. Mum kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the grieving mother to perfection. But I knew the truth now. We all did. Ms. Chen, the prosecutor said, approaching the witness stand with a tablet in her hands. Can you tell the court what happened on the night of October 15th? I took a shaky breath and began to recount that terrible night. The rain, the abandoned store, the moment my own parents left me to die on the side of the road. As I spoke, I could hear murmurs from the gallery behind me. Someone was crying softly. And at the time they abandoned you, what was your physical condition? The prosecutor asked. I couldn't walk, I said, my voice growing stronger. The medications I was taking for my rheumatoid arthritis had caused severe neurological side effects. My legs were completely numb. I had no feeling from the waist down. Were your parents aware of this condition? Yes. They drove me to the neurologist appointment that morning, where Dr. Martinez explained that the numbness could last for weeks while my body adjusted to the new medication protocol. The prosecutor nodded and tapped her tablet. Your Honour, I'd like to present Exhibit A7, security footage from Murphy's gas station on Maple Street, taken at 9:47 p.m. on October 15th. A large screen descended from the ceiling, and suddenly there it was, grainy, black and white footage of my parents' Honda pulling into the gas station parking lot. The timestamp showed 9:47 p.m, exactly when they'd claimed they were at home watching television. The courtroom fell silent as we watched my father drag me from the back seat, my legs obviously not supporting my weight. Even in the poor quality video, you could see my body go limp as he set me against the wall of the abandoned store next door. The defendant's vehicle remained at the location for approximately 30 seconds, the prosecutor said, as we watched the Honda's headlights disappear from frame, during which time Ms. Chen was left alone in freezing rain without means of communication or mobility. I heard my mother sob loudly from the defendant's table, but when I glanced over, her eyes were completely dry. The defense attorney stood up for cross-examination, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she approached. She had the kind of predatory smile that made my skin crawl. Ms. Chen, isn't it true that you've been financially dependent on your parents your entire adult life? Marcus stood up immediately. Objection? Relevance? Sustained, Judge Morrison said firmly. Ms. Patterson, the defendant's financial obligations to their daughter don't justify abandonment. But the damage was done. The defense attorney had planted the seed. Maybe I really was just a burden who'd pushed my parents too far. Let me rephrase, she said smoothly. Ms. Chen, how much money did your parents spend on your medical care over the past decade? I felt my cheeks burn. I don't know the exact amount. Would you be surprised to learn it was over $200,000? Money that could have gone toward your parents' retirement, your sister's college education, family vacations. Objection, Marcus was on his feet again, his voice sharp with anger. Your Honour, this line of questioning is victim blaming at its worst. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her expression stern. Ms. Patterson, I'm going to stop you right there. The cost of medical care doesn't justify criminal abandonment. Move on. The defence attorney smiled like she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. No further questions. As I made my way back to the plaintiff's table, I caught sight of familiar faces in the gallery. Sarah was there, looking uncomfortable in a black dress that screamed funeral appropriate. Next to her sat our cousins Jenny and Michael, both avoiding eye contact with our parents. But the real surprise was Mrs. Henderson, our elderly next-door neighbour, sitting in the front row with a thick folder in her lap. She gave me an encouraging nod, and I realised Marcus had been serious about those witnesses. The prosecution calls Dr. Elena Martinez to the stand, the prosecutor announced. Dr. Martinez, my neurologist, was a small woman with silver hair and the kind of calm authority that comes from 30 years of medical practice. She explained my condition in simple terms that even the jury could understand. Rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disorder, she said, but in Ms. Chen's case, the disease has been complicated by medication-induced peripheral neuropathy. The treatments that keep her immune system from attacking her joints have damaged her nervous system. In your professional opinion, could Ms. Chen have walked or called for help on the night in question? Absolutely not. I had explained to both Ms. Chen and her parents that morning that she would likely experience complete lower body numbness for several weeks. They were specifically instructed not to leave her alone during this period due to the risk of falls and inability to seek emergency help. The defence attorney tried to poke holes in Dr. Martinez's testimony, suggesting that my condition was exaggerated or that I should have been in a care facility instead of living independently. But Dr. Martinez held firm. Ms. Chen is a fully functional adult with a chronic but manageable condition. What she needed was family support during a temporary medication adjustment. What she received was abandonment. Then came the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Marcus stood up, straightening his tie with the careful precision I remembered from when he used to practice debate team arguments in front of his bedroom mirror. Your Honour, the prosecution calls Marcus Chen to the stand. Watching my brother walk to the witness stand was surreal. This was the same person who used to bring me comic books when I was stuck in the hospital, who taught me to play chess during long afternoons when I was too tired to go outside. But now he moved with the confidence of someone who owned the courtroom. Mr. Chen, what is your relationship to the plaintiff? Emma is my sister, my younger sister. And what is your profession? I'm a litigation attorney with Hartwell and Associates. I specialise in corporate law, but I've spent considerable time studying family law and elder abuse statutes. The prosecutor walked him through his observations over the years. All those family dinners where I was treated differently, all those medical emergencies where our parents were too busy to help. All those times I'd called him crying because I felt invisible in my own family. Mr. Chen, did there come a time when you began documenting your parents' treatment of your sister? Marcus nodded grimly. About 2 years ago, I realised that what I was witnessing wasn't just neglect. It was systematic abuse. I started keeping records. What kind of records? Financial records showing that my parents claimed Emma as a dependent on their taxes while simultaneously refusing to help with her medical expenses. Audio recordings of family gatherings where Emma was openly disparaged. Witness statements from family friends who'd observed the pattern of exclusion and emotional abuse. The defence attorney objected to the recordings, but Judge Morrison allowed them after reviewing the transcripts. We listened to Christmas dinner from 2 years ago, where Dad complained loudly about having to deal with Emma's drama, while I sat at the same table. We heard Mum telling Sarah's mother-in-law that they were tired of having a sick daughter who never got better. But the most damning evidence came next. Mr. Chen, I show you what's been marked as Exhibit B12. Can you identify this for the court? Marcus looked at the document in his hands, and I saw something flicker across his face. Pain, anger, determination. This is a copy of my parents' insurance claim from 3 years ago when Emma was hospitalised for a severe arthritis flare. What's significant about this document? They claimed $15,000 in medical expenses for tax purposes, but according to Emma's medical records, they only paid $200 of the actual hospital bill. The rest was covered by Emma's own insurance and a payment plan she set up herself. The courtroom erupted in whispers. I heard someone say insurance fraud and felt my stomach drop. They've been claiming her as a dependent while forcing her to pay her own medical bills. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. They've collected tax benefits for supporting a disabled adult child while simultaneously telling her she was too much of a financial burden to help. The prosecutor let that sink in before continuing. Mr. Chen, can you tell us about the night of October 15th? I'd been monitoring my parents' behaviour toward Emma more closely after she called me several weeks earlier, crying about medical bills they'd refused to help with. I installed a GPS tracker on their vehicle and had been following them occasionally when Emma visited. You followed them that night? I did. I watched them drive Emma to an abandoned area and leave her in the rain. I waited until they were gone, then went to help her. Why didn't you intervene immediately? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Because I needed them to complete the criminal act. I needed undeniable proof of abandonment for the case I was building. I felt tears streaming down my face. My brother had watched our parents abandon me because he knew it was the only way to stop them from hurting me ever again. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal. She painted Marcus as an opportunistic lawyer trying to destroy his own family for money, suggested that he had manipulated me into filing charges, implied that the whole case was a scheme to get revenge on parents who'd simply reached their breaking point. But Marcus never wavered. Every attack she made, he deflected with calm professionalism and devastating facts. Ms. Patterson, you're asking the jury to believe that a woman who couldn't walk, couldn't call for help, and was left in freezing rain somehow deserved to be abandoned because she was expensive to care for. Is that really the defence you want to present? When the defence attorney finally sat down, she looked defeated. The trial continued for 3 more days. We heard from Mrs. Henderson, who testified about watching my parents drive away without me countless times over the years. We heard from Mike, Sarah's husband, who broke down crying as he described family gatherings where I was treated like a problem that needed to be managed rather than a person who needed to be loved. Sarah herself never took the stand, but I saw her leave the courtroom during Mike's testimony, her face pale and stricken. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, The foreman stood up with a piece of paper in his hands, and I felt the entire world hold its breath. On the charge of abandonment of a dependent adult, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of financial exploitation of a vulnerable person, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of criminal neglect resulting in endangerment, we find the defendants guilty. The courtroom exploded. My mother collapsed into her chair, finally showing real tears. My father just stared straight ahead, his face carved from stone. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following week, but she had something to say first. "I've been on this bench for 15 years, she said, her voice carrying clearly over the noise in the courtroom. And I have never seen a case that so clearly demonstrated the difference between family by blood and family by choice. Mr. Marcus Chen, your dedication to protecting your sister shows us what real family love looks like. Mr. and Mrs. Chen," she turned to my parents, "you will have the rest of your lives to contemplate how you failed not just as parents, but as human beings." As we left the courthouse that day, reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed, but I barely heard any of it. Marcus kept his arm around me, steering me through the crowd toward his car. "It's over," he said softly as we drove away. "They can never hurt you again." But even as relief washed over me, I felt a strange emptiness. These people had been my family for 28 years. Despite everything they'd done, losing them completely felt like losing a piece of myself. The sentencing hearing the following week was swift. My parents each received 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and were ordered to pay $75,000 in restitution. Money they'd claimed in tax benefits while neglecting my care. They were also issued permanent restraining orders, meaning they couldn't contact me or come within 500 feet of my residence. But the real shock came after the hearing, as Marcus and I were gathering our things to leave. Emma, wait!" I turned to see Sarah hurrying toward us, her face streaked with tears. She looked older than I remembered, worn down by months of family chaos and public scrutiny. "Sarah," I said carefully. Marcus moved slightly closer, protective. "I'm sorry," she blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. "I'm so sorry. I knew what they were doing was wrong, but I told myself it wasn't my business, that you and Marcus would work it out somehow. I was a coward." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw not the golden child who'd always been favoured, but a woman who'd built her entire identity around being the good daughter, and was finally realising what that had cost. "I want to make this right," she continued. "Mike and I, we want you to be part of our lives, real part. We're having a baby in the spring, and I want my child to know their Aunt Emma. The real Emma, not the version Mom and Dad created." For a moment I felt that old hope flicker, the desperate need to be accepted, to belong somewhere. But then I looked at Marcus, who'd risked everything to save me, and I realised something important. "I appreciate that, Sarah, I really do, but I need time to figure out who I am outside of this family's dysfunction. Maybe someday we can build something new, but it has to be on my terms." Sarah nodded, tears still flowing. "I understand. Just know that the invitation is always open, okay?" As we watched her walk away, Marcus put his arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone else's approval or trying to earn my place in the world. "Yeah," I said, and meant it. "I'm okay." 3 months later, I was sitting in my apartment. My apartment Not the one Marcus had set up for me, but one I'd chosen and furnished myself, working on my laptop. The blog I'd started about surviving family abandonment had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. I received dozens of messages every day from people who'd experienced similar situations, and I was working with a literary agent to turn my story into a book. Marcus stopped by every Sunday for dinner, but our relationship had evolved too. I wasn't his sick little sister who needed protecting anymore, and he wasn't the only person standing between me and the world. We were just siblings who genuinely liked each other's company. "You know what's funny?" I said to him one Sunday as we cleaned dishes together. "What's that?" "For years, I thought I was broken because my parents couldn't love me. But the truth is, they were broken. I was just the convenient target." Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "Took you long enough to figure that out." Better late than never. As I got ready for bed that night, I found myself thinking about that scared, soaked girl who'd been abandoned outside a gas station. She'd thought her life was ending, but really, it was just beginning. Sometimes family isn't who gave birth to you. Sometimes it's who chooses to stay, who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself, who sees your worth even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. And sometimes the most important family member you find is yourself. The person you become when you stop trying to earn love from people who are never capable of giving it. I pulled out my phone and opened my blog, ready to write my next post. At the top of the page, I typed, "Have you ever felt like a burden to your own family? You're not alone, and you're definitely not broken. Let me tell you why." The cursor blinked, waiting. I took a deep breath and began to type, knowing that somewhere out there, someone else was sitting in the rain, wondering if anyone would ever come for them. They would. And until they did, my words would have to be enough to remind them that they were worth saving, that they had always been worth saving.